My mother left my novel acceptance letter unopened for weeks because she thought it was just another rejection. When I confronted her, she said, writing was only a hobby. But years of humiliation made me make a decision she never saw coming. I'm 26 years old, graduated with a literature degree like 4 years ago, and since then I've been working in advertising while writing a novel that I started when I was 19. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few weeks ago with my mother basically destroyed me in a way I didn't think was possible. Like, I knew my relationship with her wasn't perfect, but I never imagined we'd get to such a horrible point. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand all the context. My mother, Brenda, is 48 and she's a managing director at a consulting company. She grew up super poor. I mean, really poor. One of those families where sometimes there wasn't food on the table and all that. So for her, financial stability is literally the most important thing in the world. I don't blame her for that, you know? I understand where she's coming from, but the problem is that obsession with money and security has basically controlled my entire life and all our conversations for as long as I can remember. My dad, Anthony, was completely different. He died 2 years ago from a heart attack. He was only 50. And I swear, since he's been gone, I feel like I lost the only ally I had in my family. Dad always supported me with the writing thing, since I was a kid filling notebooks with weird stories about dragons and princesses. He read all of them, and always told me I had talent, that I should keep writing. When I told him at 19 that I wanted to write a novel, my mom literally laughed in my face and said something like, "That's a hobby, Natalie, not a career." But Dad hugged me and told me to do it, to chase that dream. The thing is, I've been writing this damn novel for 7 years. I've completely rewritten it like 5 times. Can you believe that? And for the past 3 years, I've been sending it to publishers, literary agents, contests, whatever. And every rejection, every letter saying, "Thanks but no thanks," has been an opportunity for my mother to remind me I'm wasting my time, that I should focus on something real, that writing doesn't pay the bills. The Wednesday dinners at her house, which are supposedly to keep us close after Dad's death, have basically become weekly sessions where she criticizes every aspect of my life. I don't know if you understand how exhausting it is to have someone, especially your mother, constantly telling you your dream is stupid. Because it's not like she always says it that directly, sometimes it's more subtle. You know, comments like, "When are you going to look for a real job?" Or, "Your cousin Sandra just bought her second apartment, she's your age." Or my favorite, "Your father filled your head with fantasies and look where you are now." She said that last one like 6 months after he died. And honestly, I wanted to scream at her, but I just sat there eating her roast chicken that wasn't even that good. So anyway, like 2 months ago, after receiving my umpteenth rejection I think I was up to rejection number 47. Yeah, I counted them all because I'm a masochist apparently. I decided I was going to send the manuscript one last time. One last time. And if they rejected me, I was going to quit. I was going to save the file in some lost folder on my computer and never talk about being a writer again. I swore it to myself while crying in my apartment on a Tuesday night eating ice cream straight from the container. I spent like 3 weeks reviewing the manuscript again, polishing every line, every dialogue, every description. I sent it to a medium-sized publisher, not super famous but not unknown either, one that published the kind of contemporary fiction I write. And then I waited, and kept going to Wednesday dinners where my mother kept being my mother. I mean, critical and difficult. At one of those dinners, like 3 weeks after sending the manuscript, she was particularly unbearable. She asked me how my hobby was going. "Yes," she called it that, with that condescending tone she has. And when I told her I'd sent the book out again, she literally sighed as if I was telling her I'd thrown money in the trash. She said, and I quote, verbatim, because these words stayed burned in my memory, "Natalie, honey, at some point you're going to have to accept that not everyone is born to be an artist. Some of us are made for more practical things." I left her house that night feeling like shit, obviously. But then, like 2 weeks after that horrible dinner, I got an email. It was a Friday morning. I was at my desk at the advertising office reviewing some super boring designs for a cereal campaign or something like that, and I saw the notification on my phone. The subject line said, Submission. The Weight of Small Moments. That's my novel's title. Kind of pretentious, I know, but I love it. And my heart, I'm not exaggerating, started beating so hard I thought I was going to pass out right there in my cubicle. I opened the email, and the first line said something like, "Dear Natalie, we are pleased to inform you that we have decided to accept your manuscript for publication." I had to read it 3 times because I literally couldn't process what I was seeing. You know? After 3 years of rejections, after 47 no thank yous, after all the times my mother had made me feel like a failure, someone wanted to publish my book. Someone thought my work was worthwhile. I started crying right there in the office, like tears running down my face in front of the computer, and my cubicle mate asked if I was okay, and all I could say was, "They're going to publish me. They're going to publish my book over and over like a crazy person." She hugged me and I kept crying, and probably the whole office thought I'd lost it, but I didn't care at all. The first thing I thought, after the initial shock, was, I have to tell Mom. And I know it sounds weird considering everything I just told you, but a part of me, that stupid, optimistic part that still wants her mother's approval, thought this was going to change everything. I thought I'd finally be able to prove to her I wasn't wasting my time, that I was right to pursue this, that Dad was right to support me. I imagined her surprised face, maybe even proud, when I told her the news. The email said they were going to send an official letter with all the contract details and everything, but that I could expect to receive it at my address in the next few days. I decided not to tell my mother anything until I had the physical letter in my hands. I wanted that dramatic moment where I'd show her the official paper, like tangible proof that this was real. The letter arrived the following Tuesday. A big white envelope with the publisher's logo, super professional and official. I opened it like 1,000 times just to read it and reread it, to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Wednesday was dinner day at Mom's house. So, I decided to bring the letter with me. I put it in my purse and practiced all day, how I was going to tell her, what words I was going to use, how I was going to hand her the envelope. I got to her house that Wednesday around 7 p.m. She lives in a nice house in the suburbs, one of those she bought with her own money and is super proud of because it represents all her hard work and all that. I rang the doorbell, and she opened with that tense smile she always has, the one that doesn't reach her eyes, and said, "You're late," even though it was only 7:03, typical. We went in and the table was already set. She'd made lasagna, which is my favorite food, or at least it was when I was like 12. She never updated that information apparently. We sat down and started eating, and she started with the usual questions. How's work going? What projects do I have? Have I thought about asking for a raise? I was super nervous with the letter in my purse, waiting for the perfect moment to take it out. And then she said something that still, it makes me angry when I remember it. She said, "By the way, a letter for you arrived at my house last week, from some publisher. I assume it's another rejection, so I didn't even bother opening it. It's there on the entry table." My heart literally stopped. What? A letter for me at her house? And then I remembered that when I sent this last manuscript, I used her address as an alternate contact address because I was having problems with my building's mail. I got up so fast I almost knocked over my chair and went to the entry. And there it was. Another envelope from the same publisher, unopened. I grabbed it and went back to the table, and my mother was looking at me with that "what's wrong with you" expression, and I could only hold the envelope trembling. She took a sip of her wine and said, like super casual, "Natalie, honey, enough is enough. How many times are they going to reject you before you understand this isn't going to happen? You're 26 years old, you need to think about your future for real, not these fantasies." And I was still standing there holding the envelope, and she kept talking, every word like a knife. "And don't get me wrong, I love that you have hobbies, but it's time for you to be realistic. Your father put these ideas in your head and look where that left you. Working in advertising and wasting your nights writing things nobody's going to read." In that moment, something in me broke. I showed her the envelope I'd brought in my purse, the one that had arrived at my house, and I said, "This one arrived at my apartment a week ago." She looked at me confused, and I continued, "Open it, come on, open it since you're so sure it's another rejection." She grabbed the envelope, kind of annoyed, like I was being dramatic, and opened it. I watched her read the first lines and her expression changed. She went pale, like really pale, lost all the color in her face. And then she looked at me and I was crying, not from happiness but from pure rage, and I said, "They accepted me, Mom. They're going to publish my book, the one that according to you nobody's going to read, the one that's just a fantasy." And then she And this is what hurt me most of all. Instead of apologizing, instead of congratulating me, she started to panic. She said, wait. Don't tell me you're going to quit your job for this, Natalie. You can't be that irresponsible. And I yelled at her that I wasn't going to quit, that I hadn't even thought about that yet. But she kept going, because if you think I'm going to support you while you play at being a writer, you're wrong. I've already supported you financially too much. Which was a lie, by the way. Because I pay my rent, my bills, everything since I graduated. She helped me with college tuition. But since then I've been completely independent. But she was in total panic mode and she said to me, literally, if you quit that job, I'm going to cut you off. I'm not going to finance this craziness. Enough is enough. And I exploded. I yelled at her that I didn't need her money, that all I'd ever wanted was her support, her faith in me, some damn maternal pride. I told her that Dad always believed in me, and that since he died, she'd done everything possible to make me feel like garbage every time I talked about my writing. I told her that envelope that had arrived at her house, and that she didn't even bother to open because she assumed it was another rejection. It was perfect proof that she never, not for 1 second, believed I could make it. She tried to take it back, said, "No, honey, wait, congratulations, this is wonderful." But I was already grabbing my purse and jacket. I said, "No, don't do it now. Don't pretend you're happy when 2 minutes ago you were telling me this was a waste of time." I left her house crying so hard I could barely see to drive back to my apartment. The next few days were horrible. She called me like 1,000 times, left me voicemails saying she was so sorry for reacting that way, that she was surprised, and didn't know what to say. That of course she was proud of me. But I didn't answer any of her calls. I couldn't. Every time I saw her name on my phone, I felt this mix of rage and sadness that made me want to scream. Like 2 weeks after that horrible dinner, I started to feel lonely. Like, really lonely. Because yes, I was angry with my mother, but she was my only family since Dad died. I don't have siblings. My grandparents already passed away, and most of my aunts, uncles, and cousins live in other states. And a part of me, that stupid part again, missed my mom despite everything. I sent her a text saying we could talk if she wanted. We met at a neutral cafe, not at her house or mine. Neutral territory where neither of us would feel too comfortable. She arrived with flowers, like a big bouquet of roses that honestly seemed like an empty gesture, but I accepted them anyway. She apologized again. She told me she'd reacted badly, that the shock of the news had caught her off guard, that it's always hard for her to see things from my perspective because she comes from such a different world. Everything sounded right, you know? The right words, in the right order. And I wanted to believe her. I swear I wanted to. I asked her directly, "Mom, are you proud of me?" And she said, "Of course I am. You're my daughter." And I said, "No, not for being your daughter. Are you proud of my writing, of my book, of the fact that they're going to publish me?" And there was a long silence, too long. Finally, she said, and these words also stayed burned in my memory forever, "Natalie, I love you, and I'll always love you, but I have to be honest with you. I don't think you're a good writer. I've read parts of your book when you've sent them to me, and it's hard for me to understand it. I find the work confusing and pretentious. But if someone else thinks it's worth publishing, then I'm glad for you." I sat there looking at her and felt like I'd been emptied, from the inside, like my whole body was just an empty shell. Because it's one thing for your mother not to understand your dream, but it's something completely different for her to tell you directly that she thinks you're bad at what you love to do, that what you've worked on for 7 years is confusing and pretentious. I started crying there in the cafe, but not normal crying, like I started sobbing hysterically, those sobs that come from your stomach and make your whole body shake. People were looking at us and I didn't care. My mother tried to touch my arm and I pulled away. I got up, left the flowers on the table, and left without saying a word because I knew if I opened my mouth only screams would come out. I got to my apartment and locked myself in my room and cried for hours. I called my best friend and told her everything, and she said my mom was a cruel person and didn't deserve to be in my life. But the problem is that no matter how cruel someone is, when it's your mother, when it's the only family you have left, you can't just cut her out of your life that easily. Or at least I couldn't. Like 2 more weeks passed without us talking. In that time, I signed the contract with the publisher, started the manuscript editing process, talked with the marketing team about the release date and all that. And I also made a decision. I quit my job in advertising. Not to play at being a writer like my mom would think, but because I was offered a better paying freelance job that would give me more flexibility to focus on writing and the book launch. When my mother found out, because apparently my office coworker is friends with a friend of hers, how small the world is, she called me immediately. The conversation was super tense and weird. She tried to sound worried, but I could hear the implied "I told you so" in every word. I explained about the freelance job and that I was making more money, not less, but I could feel she didn't believe me or didn't want to believe me. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Like a week later, on a Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and it was my mom, without warning. Something she never does because she's super into, we have to make plans in advance. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. She came into my apartment without me inviting her and sat on my couch and started crying. Like, really crying. Not that elegant crying she sometimes does, but that ugly, desperate crying. And between sobs, she told me, "I don't know how to be your mother. Natalie, I don't know how to support you in something I don't understand. That scares me. That goes against everything I was taught was important in life." She kept talking and told me that after our last conversation at the cafe, she hadn't been able to sleep well a single night. That she'd been thinking about everything she'd said to me over the years and realized how much damage she'd done. That when she was growing up in poverty, she dreamed that her children, she never had more kids after me, but still, would never have to worry about money, and that obsession had blinded her to everything else. She said, "I read your complete manuscript, the one you sent me years ago that I never finished reading. I stayed up all night reading it from beginning to end. And you're right. I don't completely understand it. There are parts that are too abstract for me. But Natalie, I can see your soul in those pages. I can see how much work and love you put into this. And that has to be worth something. That has to mean I'm an idiot for not having seen it before." I was crying at that point too. I told her that all I'd ever wanted was for her to believe in me, that I didn't need her to understand every metaphor or every narrative twist. I just needed her to trust that I knew what I was doing, that my dream was valid even if it was different from hers. She hugged me and we stayed like that for a long while, both of us, crying, in my living room. And then she said something that surprised me. "I want us to go to therapy together." I asked her what she meant, and she explained she'd been seeing a therapist for the past 2 weeks, which was shocking because my mother had never believed in therapy. She said it was for weak people, and that the therapist had suggested that maybe family therapy would help us build a healthier relationship. I'm not going to lie. Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late, that she'd already done too much damage. But another part, that part that has missed my mom all these years despite everything, that desperately wants to have someone who's proud of me, that has felt empty since Dad died and doesn't want to lose her only remaining parent, that part said yes. We've been going to therapy together for like a month now, once a week. I'm not going to say everything is perfect now, because that would be a lie. My mother still says things that hurt me sometimes. Still doesn't really understand my writing, still worries too much about money and stability. But she's trying, you know? She's really trying to listen to me, understand my perspective, validate my feelings. In our last session, the therapist had us do an exercise where we had to tell each other something we appreciated about the other. My mom told me, "I appreciate your perseverance, the fact that you didn't give up on your writing even when I made you feel like you should. That requires a strength I didn't have at your age." And I cried because it was the first time I felt she really saw me, that she saw my effort, my passion, my dedication. I told her I appreciated that she was willing to change, to go to therapy, to admit she'd made mistakes. I told her I know being a mother is difficult and that I'll probably screw up 1,000 times too if I ever have kids, but that the fact she's trying to repair our relationship means everything to me. My book comes out in 4 months. The publisher is planning a launch event and everything. I asked my mom if she'd come and she said yes, that nothing would make her happier. I don't know what that day will be like, if she'll really be proud or if she'll still have those doubts in the back of her mind. But at least she'll be there, and that's more than I had 2 months ago. Last week, we were at her house having dinner. Yeah, we're still doing Wednesday dinners. Some traditions are hard to break. And she asked me what my novel was exactly about. She'd asked before, but always superficially. This time she sounded genuinely curious. I explained it was about a woman dealing with her father's death and her complicated relationship with her mother while trying to find her own voice as an artist. I looked at her when I finished talking, and she had tears in her eyes and said, "It's about us, isn't it? I don't have that perfect happy ending where my mom becomes my biggest fan and completely understands my art and everything is wonderful. But I have hope. And that's something I didn't have a month ago. I have hope that we can build something new. A relationship where she doesn't have to completely understand what I do to support me. And where I don't need her constant validation to know that what I do is worthwhile. I guess that's enough for now."